On May 18th, we will have the results of the UCP leadership. Will Premier Jason Kenney remain on as party leader? Will he receive his minimum 50+1 vote? Or will we see a potential new leader? To discuss this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, the votes have to be in by May the 11th. Kenney has had his distractors and his supporters. Can you explain what will happen if Kenney loses and what will happen if he wins and just stays on?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a who knows situation. So if Kenny loses, that's relatively straightforward. He'll step down, they'll go into a leadership race. Who knows who the next leader could be? I think probably a safe bet is Brian Jean, but there's a few other possibilities in there as well. If Jason Kenney wins, this is where things get complicated. What we could see is Jason Kenney having, an overwhelming victory. Caucus falls in line behind him. He says, look, you guys need to stop messing around, criticizing me in public. We're a year from an election. Everybody, pull the oars without causing too much trouble. The other scenario, maybe the more likely scenario, is that Jason Kenney squeaks by, with somewhere between, say, 50 and 65%. And then the question is, can he hold on to the party leadership with that level of endorsement? What will his caucus do? What will the grassroots do? Will people in the caucus leave and go sit as independents? Or will they fall in line and, play ball until the next election? So, I think May 18th is going to answer this question of whether or not Jason Kenney has the confidence of the party, but how much confidence does he have if he wins is really going to be the next sort of big question. And honestly, I don't know what's going to happen. If I had to bet money on it, I would bet on Jason Kenney winning the review. But the question of how much is really, really an open one right now and what that's all going to mean.
Do you think it also works to his advantage, the fact that they opened up to all of the party membership, like around 50,000, as opposed to the angry voters who were going to be attending in Red Deer originally for the review?
Well, that's exactly it. So I do think that helps him. When you had $100 or so fee to go to Red Deer, you had 15,000 or so people promising to go. No doubt that's the group of people that feel really strongly about Jason Kenney, whether they're in favor of him or whether they oppose him. I suspect that was probably skewed towards those who oppose him. But, if you look at the whole swath of the Conservative Party UCP membership, you have people there who maybe don't feel super strongly about Jason Kenney, but who maybe feel strongly about winning the next election or maybe feel strongly about party unity. It just casts a far wider net. And, when it sort of comes down to the votes, let's take a completely different example of the Fort McMurray by-election, where there was a strong alternative to the United Conservatives with the Wild Rose Independence Party. They were running their leader in that by-election, and he didn't even get as many votes as the New Democrat in that riding. So, when it comes to casting the ballot, I think people tend to go with, the person they know, even if they're not super passionate about him. They might have strong feelings about going into a leadership race a year from an election. So it's a long-winded way of me getting around to saying that I think you're right, that this probably does favor Kenney in some fashion to go to the entire party membership.
Many Kenney supporters I've spoken with as well are saying the reason why the party needs to be unified behind Jason Kenney, he's the only one who can defeat or can continue on and not allow Rachel Notley and the NDP to take over his government, that he's the strongest candidate. So remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. Tyler, there was apparently a bit of drama when House Leader Jason Nixon got into it with independent MLA Todd Loewen. Loewen implied that Nixon said false things about him, and Nixon wasn't too happy and yelled in the direction of the Speaker, Nathan Cooper. Tell me more.
Yeah, so this happened about a month ago. And of course, as people know, you can't call someone a liar in the legislature. It's, sort of unparliamentary language. And Loewen didn't actually say that, but he did kind of imply it. And Nixon used the F word and the D word loud enough, actually, that it got picked up by the sort of Hansard transcription. And this was, very unparliamentary language, and there was a point of privilege made about it. So this was all resolved this week when the Speaker sort of ruled on it. But the strange thing that happened is Jason Nixon apologized, but he wasn't there. He had a letter that was read out by the Deputy House Leader, Joseph Schau, I think. And, the apology was accepted and it was all sort of resolved. But, just sort of a weird situation in the legislature because Nixon wasn't there to actually make this apology. And, beyond just the little bit of drama, I think this probably goes to show, the extent to which there are some tempers running high and tensions within the United Conservatives right now, and for Jason Nixon in particular, actually, because as people probably know, he had someone contesting the nomination to be the UCP candidate in his riding in the next election, and Jason Nixon might have lost that, but the party stepped in and removed the other candidate, things like that. So all sorts of things kind of going on, and you see a little bit here and there maybe when some of those tensions are sort of bubbling over.
Yeah, a lot of passion in politics, as you and I can attest. Now, Tyler, you wrote that the UCP prevented an anti-racism bill from moving forward, a private member's bill brought forward by NDP MLA David Shepherd. Tell me more.
Right. So this was a private member's bill that would have sort of compelled the Alberta government to keep race-based statistics and report back on some of these things, and also create sort of a racism commissioner who would have analyzed government programming and policies for sort of equity reasons. And because it's a private member's bill, it doesn't automatically go to the legislature. It goes to a committee to evaluate whether or not it should proceed. And it isn't proceeding. And because it sort of split along party lines, the UCP voted against it. The NDP voted in favor of it, obviously. The UCP MLAs sort of argued that this required more consultation before they go forward on it, even if it was a noble bill, which is what one of the UCP MLAs said. Then another little interesting procedural quirk out of this is that the NDP had wanted some members of the public to sort of testify or speak about the bill, but they had to submit a list of names by, I think, April 11th, a certain date at any rate, and they missed that date. So none of these people could actually speak to it. So a little mistake maybe by the NDP there, and that bill isn't really going ahead at the moment.
We've been seeing a break at the pumps now that the provincial government has turfed the provincial sales tax on fuel right now, 13 cents a litre, which is helping a lot of us. Now, the province could also be giving us some gas bill rebates as a natural gas as early as June to provide relief for consumers who've seen some pretty huge utility bills this winter. Tyler, how much relief are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking all total at the moment about $150. So it's sort of $50 a month for, I think, January, February, and March bills. And as everyone watching this knows, bills have done some crazy things the last few months. So this is part of sort of a cost of living relief package, I guess we could say. And that legislation has been tabled. Relief could come as early as June. And then they're also sort of looking forward to next fall and saying that rebates could kick in if natural gas gets above a certain level. I think $6.50 a gigajoule is sort of the threshold they're looking at, sort of similar to the $80 per barrel price that they've looked at for the fuel tax implementation. So there could be a little bit of relief here and there. The NDP sort of saying, is this enough? Is $50 enough to offset your $500 bill you might have had in January or whatever? But I think it more broadly goes to show how important cost of living stuff is right now. We talk about inflation, we talk about gas prices and all these sorts of things. And looking forward to the next year, is this maybe going to be an election issue in some fashion? And I mean, at this point, I think it's hard to say that it won't be, because it certainly looks like one of the biggest issues facing Albertans and Canadians as a whole.
If only we could do something now about the price of food right now too, which is just going through the roof. A recent insurance industry report, speaking of cost of living, shows that Alberta car insurance companies raked in $400 million more in premiums in 2020 versus 2019, yet paid out less in claims. I talked to a lot of people here under the age of 30, Tyler, in our newsroom, and they're paying through the teeth right now when it comes to their car insurance premiums. The UCP removed the cap for car insurance premiums in 2019, saying insurance companies were kind of struggling to make money. But that doesn't appear to be the case anymore.
No, and the NDP is really making a fair bit of hay with this, sort of saying that this is, big companies profiting off the backs of regular people and stuff like that. And they've also pointed to the systems in Saskatchewan and British Columbia, where there's, of course, government options, cheaper government options to sort of keep the price down a little bit on insurance. And Jason Kenney's come out and said, this is Soviet-style insurance. He wants the market to make these decisions and all that. So a bit of a strange scenario there, where the UCP is being a little less generous, shall we say, on a cost of living issue. And premiums have come down a little bit since 2020 because I believe people weren't driving as much during the pandemic. That sort of brought some of these prices back down. But it just goes to what we were talking about cost of living and how important that is for politics right now.
The province recently announced $2 million to help with the settlement of Ukrainian refugees. Tyler, what will the funding be going towards specifically?
Yeah, so it's sort of money to help them get settled in terms of getting driver's licenses, in terms of getting health information, some language and job programming, things like that. So it's sort of an interesting situation federally where they're sort of refugees, but they're actually being resettled, I believe, as temporary residents. So there isn't sort of the whole package of supports federally that a refugee might normally get. So this is sort of trying to plug some of those holes between what a refugee might get and what a regular immigrant, for example, might get. So a little bit of a confusing context there, I would say. But yeah, that's money going to help Ukrainians. Of course, there's a huge Ukrainian population in Alberta, some 350,000 or something like that, I think. So obviously, a lot of sort of homegrown interest, shall we say, in helping these people get resettled to Canada, and obviously a lot of interest in helping these people too, because Canadians, everyone knows a Ukrainian or a Ukrainian family, and lots of Ukrainians have family back in Ukraine. So, I think a lot of interest on the government side and the public side on helping these people resettle.
Now, a story we recently had on Bridge City News is how the government is building a new $50 million clean hydrogen center. Now, Premier Kenney says Alberta is a big hydrogen producer, and he says the industry could be worth $11 trillion by the year 2050. Where is he getting those numbers from?
Yeah, I mean, the $11 trillion is a colossal number, and I can only assume that he means sort of worldwide. I mean, it's almost inconceivable that that money would just be in Alberta, although we'd be paving the streets with gold if that turned out to be true. But he did point to government statistics that show that Alberta produces, I think, 2.4 million tons of hydrogen per year, which I think is the highest, makes us the largest hydrogen producer in Canada. And the government really wants to leverage our sort of energy extraction expertise and infrastructure to sort of pivot to hydrogen. This is sort of the next frontier, I guess, in the energy production game. So this center is supposed to bring together sort of business and research and government sort of expertise under the umbrella of Alberta Innovates, I think, sort of a crown corporation. Timeline is not super clear on that, but there's been indications for months now that Alberta was going to try and pivot to this. There's a hydrogen strategy that was released in November 2021, I think. This center announcement obviously is more of the same on that front. So I don't know when we start to see sort of returns on this, when we can say that this industry is, up and running. But another story this week by a colleague of mine at the Financial Post talking about TC Energy, which is looking at creating a hydrogen production facility near Crossfield, which would sort of use natural gas to produce hydrogen. So it seems from what I've gleaned from talking to people and what you read that this is a really sort of exciting new industry for Alberta, and the government is very, very keen on that.
There were reports that the Alberta government is planning a multi-million-dollar PR campaign in the United States, Tyler, opening a number of offices to promote Alberta energy, as we were just talking about, and spending millions in advertising and PR. Apparently, Kenney says it's been difficult getting the attention of Washington.
Yeah, so Joe Manchin was here a couple weeks ago, one of the most powerful senators. I believe he chairs the Senate Committee on Energy in the United States. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was Jason Kenney and presumably Sonia Savage, the energy minister, are going to be going to Washington at some point in the next few weeks to deliver a presentation on sort of North American energy security, how Alberta can help contribute to this. And one of the things Kenney said is, look, it's a win to even have someone like Joe Manchin come to Alberta. It's a win to even have the ear of someone in Washington and get some attention on that front. So there's some interesting things happening, at the personal level between Kenney and some politicians in the United States. He was obviously down there meeting with governors not that long ago as well. But there's also this Hearts and Minds campaign, I guess you could say, that they're looking at having, opening offices in a number of American cities, this big sort of PR push. What that'll look like is sort of hard to say. Whether or not the Canadian Energy Centre, that colloquially referred to as the War Room, is going to be involved, I don't know. But we do also have a trade mission down there. So there is, some of this infrastructure, diplomatic infrastructure, shall we say, that already exists, that it looks like they're trying to leverage into getting more investment and getting some support in the United States for maybe a new pipeline or something like that.
I'm glad you brought that up. Do you think there's ever a chance that maybe Kenney and Joe Biden can get together and maybe talk about potentially revisiting Keystone XL, especially since there's such a need south of the border for oil and gas right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, you get the sense from the federal government there hasn't been boatloads of engagement on that specific issue. I'm trying to think if a premier has ever met with the president, actually, and nothing leaps immediately to mind on that front. So I think maybe that's not super likely, but the argument Kenny's making is the US midterms are coming up. There's a very good chance the Republicans are going to take both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and so that this is actually a good time to sort of meet with people in Washington and get more engagement on that front. So in that sense, I guess one could say you don't need the president necessarily if you can meet with the right people in Congress. But of course, there's the presidential permit side of this, which was the issue of Keystone. So lots of moving parts. Keystone itself seems to be dead in the sense that TC Energy, I think, has walked away from it and things like that. Is there an opportunity for another pipeline? Maybe. I think Kenny certainly hopes so from what he said to me. To bring that all around, in terms of concrete things that could happen in the near future, I mean, it's a pretty short list, non-existent list maybe to some extent.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks again for your time today.
Always a pleasure, Hal.